Welcome to AWE 2023, day 3. It's exciting to be here. My name is Finn Staber. I'm the CEO and programmer, designer, janitor at Chicken Waffle in Austin, Texas. We build immersive content, AR and VR stuff, and it's my honor to be here today. First, if you are looking for the Wi-Fi, it's the AWE_Wi-Fi, and the password is all lowercase, find AWE, all one word. Like to take a moment to thank our sponsors, Ant Reality, Arbor XR, HoloLight, Lenovo, Sightful, Zapper, and of course the big ones, Magic Leap, Niantic, Qualcomm, Snap AR, and XReal. They are the ones that are really funding this conference year after year and making all this stuff happen. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce Danielle Montour and Dylan Fox for a presentation on breaking the exclusion cycle for immersive technologies with XR access. Sounds like a really cool title, and I'm really looking forward to hear what y'all have to say.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, hello everybody. I'm assuming this is our clicker over here.
Yes.
Shoot. All right. Ah, wonderful. This guy? All right. All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for waking up at the crack of 9 a.m. I'll go ahead and take my mask off for now. Waking up at the crack of 9 a.m. for breaking the exclusion cycle for immersive technologies. We're really pleased to be here today. And you can follow along this presentation at tinyurl.com/break-exclusion. So my name is Dylan Fox. I am the head of community and outreach for XR Access. I'm here with Danielle Montour, who is our accessibility researcher and advocate. And today we're going to be telling you about the exclusion cycle and why it fundamentally threatens the practicality of XR. We're going to tell you about some of the basics of XR accessibility, and we're going to talk about how we can break the cycle, both what we're doing at XR Access and what you can do. And then we'll have some time for question and answers. I'll go ahead and pass it to Danielle to talk about the exclusion cycle.
Thanks. Hi, y'all. I'm Danielle, and I really have found some pretty personal experiences with the exclusion cycle, even this week. So I'm going to start with our real life and then transition into VR. I am the only blind person I've seen at this conference this week, and I was not able to make my own agenda on my app. I was not able to look at labeled buttons or all the sessions or anything like that without pestering poor Dylan to ask him for some assistance on what was happening and when and where, and then where again, because I would forget later. I didn't have the access to make my own stuff. I got a speaker shirt and had a lot of stuff around eyeballs and seeing, and I don't relate. And I was not really able to interact with folks in the same way as I would at other conferences, because honestly, there's been a lot of discomfort. I am the only blind person I've seen. I think we've seen one wheelchair user here besides me being visibly disabled. And it really made clear to me that the exclusion cycle has been in full effect for a while, in that I was the only person here who looked like me. And bringing that into XR and what that cycle really is in XR, what it looks like is kind of just like how I said that I wasn't really able to make my own agenda or start here with the conference doing anything on my own. If I pull a VR headset out of a box, I can't go further than that. The first thing that happens when you put it over your face is that things show up and don't talk, and you're supposed to connect it. And I can't. And so there's the immediate stop. I'm done. That's it. And for that reason, I've never actually been in an XR environment on my own. I've played with AR that was specifically made for blind folks, but I've never actually been in mainstream VR because it wasn't accessible to me and I couldn't do it autonomously. And so the exclusion cycle looks like disabled people not being able to use something because it's inaccessible by default. And then us not being able to create things for ourselves. And then devs don't see us as users or creators at all because we're not there. And it's not because we don't want to be there. We just can't be there. But you know, what that means is the devs don't see us and we can't really talk to them because we're not there. And the few times that things have been made accessible, They've been really highly bespoke with little guidance and have been a lot more work than they would have otherwise had to be. And it doesn't have to be that way, and we want to show up. There's a lot of us blind folks who have had the adaptive design mindset forever and are really, really good at troubleshooting and really good at creating solutions to problems, and we're just not in the room. But we are sometimes with AI, not XR. So AI is a really good example of what it looks like when we are let in. I've been using GPT-4's image recognition model for months because blind folks were given some of the first access to that, because we could give feedback and make it better for not only us, but everyone else as well. And we have been for months. We are finally not under NDAs, so we can talk about that now. But it was really, really cool. And they approached us first. And they invited us to the table. And that hasn't happened here yet, which is why we're here talking about an exclusion cycle. And so I want to kind of talk about what we can do to make things accessible, what accessibility is. So accessibility, for me, how I've always said it, is making something as welcoming to as many people as possible. And honestly, our abilities, all of our abilities, everyone in the room, everyone who will watch this later's abilities fluctuate over our lifetimes. There are times when you're tired and can hardly see straight because you got 14 minutes of sleep. There are times when, we talked about yesterday, there was a really great presentation by some indoor nav folks who were talking about one of the problems they were going to be trying to solve is firefighters in a smoky building. And they're situationally blind. They're just as blind as me when there's smoke. They can't see. And so what's going to be helping me, who's blind forever, can help the firefighters who are blind for the next duration of the fire they're fighting when they're in a smoky environment. And there is a slide with firefighters in a brick building that is pouring smoke, and from what I am led to understand, the lights that are on them are kind of dimmed because of how much smoke there is. The last little bit I want to cover is tying this in a little bit, accessibility with UX, because I honestly see them as kind of being part of a unit. In UX, they often talk about, well, in usability, they talk about joy of design. And accessibility really is the backbone of joy. It is just part of what makes design good. We see on this slide 2 different ways of making an accessible entrance. The one on the right being accessible entrance in back, which I've seen them for wheelchair users. There are these restaurants that will have these entrances into the back through this alley that undoubtedly, at least in New York City, which is where I'm from, have dumpsters and rats and all kinds of crazy shit you don't want to see back there. And that's their accessible entrance. That's how they get in. And then they have to go through the kitchen. And that's weird. And on the left, there's a ramp. And that's better for everybody. Folks folks who are pushing strollers up a ramp, folks who are just having a lot of nerve pain, folks who are wearing heels and don't want to do the stairs, folks who are in wheelchairs, everybody. It makes it better for everyone. And that really, for me, is how accessibility comes into being usable. Because when we're thinking about accessibility, going beyond what might be just a tacked on accessibility entrance in the back and really making it a usable thing that is more joyful to use is really, really important. I'm going to switch it back to Dylan so he can talk a little bit more about modularity and what access can look like and how XR can work with us.
Awesome. Thanks, Danielle. So one thing I want to clear up about accessibility, a thing people often get wrong, is that there's this idea that accessibility is a gigantic checklist. And if you don't get any of them right, you're going to get sued. And that is really misleading and puts a lot of people off of exploring what could otherwise be very accessible things. Because really the fundamental principle that will make your app 99% accessible is this idea of modularity. And modularity means that effectively you can kind of mix and match inputs and outputs within your application. So whenever we use technology, we receive inputs from a device or an application, we do some thinking, and then we give it an output. We give it a command for it to go off and do for us. And those inputs and outputs can each come in many different forms for the same piece of content. So for example, let's say I get an input from my phone, it vibrates, and my output is to open up my notifications. And then I get a new input, which is my friend text messaging me, and he's, let's say he's rickrolling me. And I give a new output, which is telling him that the early 2000s want their memes back, right? These inputs and outputs can be in a variety of forms, right? That input of a text arriving, that could be my phone ringing, that could be my phone buzzing, that could be a little visual thing I see in my AR headset I'm wearing. It could be a lot of things. And then similarly, that output, I could text into my phone, I could dictate. Maybe I have a brain-computer interface that lets me put my thoughts directly into words. The key to accessibility is that making sure that that same content and those same commands are accessible in different forms, that it's modular, and that no matter what combination of ability or disability you may have, that you can still use it. Now, Danielle briefly mentioned that ramp will make everybody better, and that is an effect that we like to call the curb cut effect. The curb cut is a very simple thing. It's simply a cut in a curb, basically those ramps you see going from street level to sidewalk. And curb cuts didn't used to exist. We used to just have sidewalks and then streets everywhere. And it took a lot of advocacy from people like Ed Roberts and Jack Fisher during the civil rights movement to make those happen. Some people say they had to go out with a sledgehammer in the middle of the night and smash sidewalks and put in ramps. And lo and behold, once we had them, everybody realized, oh, wait, this is actually a good idea, because the same things that are put in place for people in wheelchairs benefit everybody, benefit people with bicycles, people with strollers, people with nerve pain, you name it. And that's often the history of accessibility advocacy in a nutshell, is you work, you work, and you work, and you finally get something accessible, and then everybody realizes, why didn't we have this in the first place? And this applies equally in XR. On the right here, we see an image of the gravity glove from Half-Life Alyx. And if you've used VR, you might know the process of picking something up off the ground can be really frustrating. You're using something, you drop it, and now you have to kind of like put one hand on your headset and lean over and kind of smack your controller into the ground a couple times trying to pick it up. It's really annoying. And what's more, it's not accessible. What may be annoying for you may be impossible for somebody who's using a wheelchair, otherwise has a mobility impairment. And what you find is that if you don't settle for annoying, if you don't settle for not accessible, you can create some really great solutions that help everyone. We're seeing now an example of these gravity gloves where rather than having to walk around a room and pick things up one at a time, you just kind of point and flick your wrist and the object flies to you. And that is a solution that is both more accessible and more usable than the alternative. It's not perfectly accessible, certainly, but it is a big improvement for a lot of folks with motor disabilities. And for everybody, it makes you feel like a Jedi. It's awesome. Another really important reason that you should be thinking about accessibility is that making something accessible to people oftentimes also makes it accessible to machines. For alternative text, that's the text that screen readers will hear if you focus over an image. That having alt text on a website not only will make it more accessible to screen reader users, it will also make it more accessible to search engines. All of a sudden, they know what those images are, and your search engine optimization can go way up. And what you'll find is that same principle applies, again, in XR. If you go to the effort of putting in something like captions, and that's what we see here in alt space. On the right, there's somebody saying, welcome to captions in alt space. What you find is that you're 90% of the way there towards, for example, what you see on the left, which is a translation. Bienvenido a los subtítulos en alt space. Excuse my terrible accent. But the work that you put in to make things accessible is never just for the percentage of the population that's disabled. It is laying the groundwork for a better user experience for everybody and for more capabilities for your own device and your own application. People here obviously going wild over ChatGPT and AI, and for good reason. And the more ways you can give those AIs to understand what is in your application, if everything in your 3D scene has a text alternative, think about how much more capable that makes AI of interacting with your application. So really, when you're investing in accessibility, you're not just investing, again, for the percentage that is either permanently, situationally, or temporarily disabled. You are making it better for everyone. Now, there are a ton of ways that things you need to learn in order to make things accessible, because 3D is a fundamentally new format. And here I'll have just one example, which is captions. On the left, we see an image here of a woman kind of pointing down and saying, this is what captions look like. And we know that's what she's saying because there's a little black box with white text that says, this is what captions look like. And in 2D, captions are a pretty well understood entity, right? You put the text in, you make it a little bit customizable, let people adjust the font, the backsplash, make sure it has good contrast, all the kind of general principles. And you're good to go. With 3D, there's a lot more variables to consider. So I'm showing you a GIF here from Vacation Simulator by Alchemy Labs, where you start off talking to this robot, and then you turn from your first-person perspective to water some flowers. And as you turn, the subtitles that were floating over the robot kind of detach from it and come to float in the center of your screen. And you'll notice there's a few things in here that make these more usable, right? There's a little icon that shows who's speaking. There's a little arrow pointing towards what direction they are. Because in 3D, when you're in VR, you can't assume that what the captions are referring to is on the screen. You have to take into consideration things like the fact the user may be looking a completely different direction from where you expect them to be. You have to think about where those captions are floating. And what happens if I were to bring this watering can right in front of my face? Does it obscure the captions? What happens? So there's considerations like this that we will need to take into effect, but the good news is we can. We can make these accessible the same way we have made 2D stuff accessible, which is by talking to people with disabilities, talking to disabled people, and understanding what is needed. So on that note, I'm going to bring you to the last section of our presentation, which is how we can break the cycle of exclusion, both what we're doing at XR Access and what you can do as a developer or a creator. So first, XR Access is a research initiative of Cornell Tech that is dedicated to making virtual, augmented, and mixed reality accessible to people with disabilities. We are a community that was originally founded in 2019 in order to engage and connect disabled people and XR creators in order to make XR inclusive of everyone. We see some images here from our 2019 symposium where we're doing just that. We're bringing in all of the different stakeholders that need to be involved in these conversations, from disabled people and advocates to content creators to platform owners to policymakers to educators to healthcare workers. We're trying to bring those folks together so that we can all create something that is inclusive and not just have to try to retrofit it all down the line. We have a number of ongoing projects in service of that. For example, our Inclusive Design of XR team is working on a stories project where we document and interview disabled people's experiences in order to help bring those to life and make sure people know that these lack of accessibility are affecting real people. We also have our accessible development of XR team working on a project we're calling Prototype for the People, where we're trying to create open source examples of things like the Meta VRC, accessibility VRCs, because a lot of these people will create the guidelines, but there's no examples of how to do it. Anybody who wants to create something accessible has to do it from scratch. And we're trying to fix that. We're trying to reduce that barrier to making things accessible any way we can. We also have a resource hub in that same vein for developers and content creators we call the XR Accessibility Project. This is a one-stop shop of accessible solutions for developers working in XR. You can access it at bit.ly/xraccess-github. And we really have worked hard to bring together all of the resources that we could find in order to make sure that if you want to make things accessible, if you have the will, we will provide you the way. Also, thanks to our colleagues at the XR Association for helping to put that together. And finally, in just 2 weeks from now, we're going to have the XR Access Symposium for 2023. This is our annual conference where, again, we try to be that boundary organization that can help connect the folks that need to be in the same room. Our theme this year is Seizing Advancements for Access, where we are trying to understand what all these new technological advancements in terms of headset capabilities, AI, haptics, and everything else, how we can apply those to make things more accessible. That's going to be June 15th and 16th in New York City and online. You can access for more information, you go to xraccess.org/symposium. And then finally, we are here for you. If you are a creator and you want to make your application more accessible, if you are a person with a disabled person, you want to share your story, we're here for you. You can access our website at xraccess.org. You can email us at info@xraccess.org. Anyone is free to join our Slack, where we've got a huge community of disabled folks, advocates, experts, and so on. That's at bit.ly/xraccess-slack. And if you're interested in participating in research, you can go to tinyurl.com/future-participate and participate in research studies that are looking for disabled folks to make sure that our understanding of the future is not based on whoever wanders into a tech room. So that's it. Thanks very much, everybody, for attending. We'll keep some time open now for questions and answers. Yes, in the front.
So in traditional computer world and now smartphones, there's screen readers that easily able to built in. Is there such a thing happening in XR?
Yeah, so the question is about screen readers, right? It is something that is definitely we're working on right now, and other folks are as well. It's really challenging to do screen readers in XR, in part because unlike with the web, where HTML, the content is kind of right there that's being interpreted, you have to go a little bit further upstream in XR right now in order to understand what's there. Web XR stuff, oftentimes they're at the lowest level, they're just dealing with pixels. And so you have to be able to understand, if this was created in Unity, what's the structure for it? What do we expose to people? Do we have a XR scenario where you're just like a website, you can see all the main headers, understand the whole space? Or do you try to keep it more kind of a first-person experience? So that is definitely something that is being actively researched as we speak.
Well, this is Danielle. As a screen reader user, I definitely also see that it's interesting because a lot of times folks are going immediately to screen readers in VR. And the thing that I'm hoping we avoid is, and if you did this stuff in the 90s, if you remember this, there were like 15,000 screen readers that started coming out. And now we have 2. So a lot of them kind of went out and weren't quite optimized. And what I'm really hoping to see is folks kind of coming together and understanding how screen reader labeling even works and how we, even at the baseline, label controls and how we do those sorts of things, instead of everyone trying to get their own Android-based screen reader situation and then not really having an idea from disabled people of how to use it. So my hope is that it's being researched and that it's going to be thoughtfully asked from disabled folks, because as you probably remember from doing this work, there were a lot of iterations before it was even decently usable. Back in the 90s, you used to have to do screen readers off of like 15 million floppy disks. It was great. Good times.
Yeah, and I'll add as well, there's a lot more than just screen readers to making VR accessible for low vision and blind folks. We're working on a project right now with the National Science Foundation on nonverbal communication in XR, right? Understanding, if if you're a blind person in a social VR environment, how do you know if there's people around you? How do you understand if people are looking at you or gesticulating wildly at you? Trying to make sure we have things like spatial sound of footsteps so that there are audio, haptic, non-visual cues to understand what's going on in your environment, that's a really important piece of this puzzle. And so I think we're going to have to look both backwards at, websites and how accessibility has worked in the past, as well as taking lessons from real life and how people, understand their environments in, for example, this very conference, because the solution is going to be a mix of those two. Any other questions? Don't be shy. Come on now. Well, in any case, I want to thank everybody again for coming out here on, again, this first thing in the morning presentation after all the parties last night, and for wanting to make sure that XR is inclusive of everyone, because we really believe that it's going to be a better world when everybody can participate and use these wild new technologies. So thanks very much, everyone, and we'll end it there.